Thanks, Jorge, and thank all of you for being here. Really appreciate you taking the opportunity to participate and engage in this conversation with us. Excuse me. As Jorge said, I'm Rachel. I'm the Assistant Director of Business Intelligence for the UT system. I'm actually going to get us started off with another quick poll. When we were looking through the registrants for this session, we saw that there were a variety of folks registering, some of whom might be creating dashboards and some of whom might be using these data dashboards. So if you could take a moment to let us know, are you primarily creating or using data dashboards? As Jorge had said, if you don't see that poll, you might have to select the poll option at the bottom of the screen for it to show up for you. It looks like we've got about almost exactly a 50-50 split, which I think is pretty interesting and not exactly what I would expect. I thought we might lean one way or the other, but that's awesome because we're actually going to split our presentation sort of between the development and use cases for these dashboards. Jake, did you want to flip over to the agenda for me, please? Thanks. So today we're going to start with talking about some of that development process, what it looked like to build the dashboards on data.tennessee.edu. Then we'll take a look at the website and look at some of the dashboards that are available on there, how you might use them, examples of the data that are on them. Assuming that we still have time, if you're asking questions throughout the presentation, then we're happy to continue answering those. But assuming that we still have some time, we're going to split into breakout rooms at that point and give you an opportunity to provide feedback on what you saw today, and also take the opportunity to discuss amongst yourselves what your experience has been with data dashboards, what you're working on, and so forth. Then we're going to wrap up with some questions and answers at the end. So if you've got some questions that didn't get answered throughout the presentation, we can answer them at that point, and then we'll be all set for the day. So at that. And for now, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Jake to talk about some of the development process.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, everyone. So I'm Jake. I'm just going to run through kind of an overview of our entire process from where we were to where we are now. Starting with, I'm just going to, if you guys haven't already seen them and you're not familiar with them, kind of how we used to report our data. So this was our enrollment dashboard that we used, and it's functional and it's fine. And I'll leave it at that. I'm almost positive you've all seen this one. This is how we used to report salaries. And this is an old report that used to be called UT Presence. On the left was the very first version of that, which is just a printout. Then we kind of modernized and started using a little bit more Power BI, but I think it's clear that there's still a lot of room to grow. And so just keep those pictures in the back of your minds. Basically, we realized Power BI is modernizing. Why don't we also try to keep up with that? So this is kind of our timeline that we went through. We had our planning phase, our drafting phase, phase of ironing out all the details and minutia, and then our publishing. So beginning with the planning phase, these were our steps. First and foremost, you got to define goals. So kind of why are we doing this? And I think our main drive was transparency, just to be as transparent as possible with the data that we have and make that data easy to access and easy to find. So, and then we did our research on other university dashboards and reporting. So what are other schools doing? How are they leveraging Power BI or whatever other data visualization software out there? Like, what do we like about them? What do we don't like? What would we like to use? And what do we want to avoid? Then we want to decide on our stakeholders, like who is our main audience, and as the system kind of, I think our main audience was the board. We want to provide them with as much data as possible, but also really the whole state of Tennessee. So that was kind of a wide range of people that we want to reach with this data. And then we had to seek out collaborators. So we have a lot of access to a lot of data, but we're not necessarily subject matter experts on all the data. So reaching out and finding people to help us create actual usable tools was super important. After all our planning, we started drafting, and off the bat, I'm going to give a quick shout out to Jimmy Wittenbarger, who you'll hear from. He was kind of the driver for all the drafting, and he put a lot of work into it. And so this was our very first draft. You can see up there at the top. This was July 25th of last year. If I counted my months right, I think that's the 7th month. Anyways, this is the first draft. And you can see like it's a little bit more coherent in terms of colors. There's a bit more style to it, but at first glance, it's a lot to take in. There's a lot of data on there. And then here's another version. This is kind of moving along the way that, or in the direction that we really wanted to move a little bit less. It's kind of following the whole less is more mantra. And we're kind of figuring out our navigation. This was the next step. This is August. You can see that we have all of our slicers on the left as opposed to that standard stock built-in Power BI slicer pane. And this one is a little bit more pleasing to the eye. You have some cool navigation tabs at the top, and it's really starting to come together. And then about mid-August, we got here. And this is getting really close to where we actually are. So we have on the left-hand side, the main navigation pane. Along the bottom, all of our filters, and along the top, we have our campus slicers. And that leaves a lot of room in the middle for the visuals, but not too much to where you're kind of tempted to overflow and put way too much on there to where it's not effective. And then by the time November, December came around, we kind of had a style nailed down. So this is pretty much where we're at now. You can see on the left there, you have all of our categories and subcategories, that navigation pane. And then again, the filters along the slicers along the bottom, campus slicers along the top. And that was, I mean, this is version 2.8. I'm pretty sure Jimmy probably could have counted even more, but he was probably being pretty nice with version counting. He put a lot of work into this, and a lot of details were ironed out throughout this process. Speaking of the details, if you're doing a big project like this was our biggest project that we've done in a long time, and we're taking extreme pride in it. So like with that being said, no detail is too small to overlook. And this is just an example of that. These are all the different icons that we went through and discussed. Like why do we like this icon? Why do we not like that icon? And at the bottom, these are our final products, our final choices. But I just threw this slide in there as an example to be like, if you're gonna take on a big project and have a range of users as widespread as ours, you don't want to overlook any detail. They're all equally important if you want to have a really good, solid project. And then once all those details, those visual details were ironed out, it's time to publish. And so I'm just going to show you, again, that's how we used to report enrollment. And this is the new enrollment landing page. And I think it's kind of amazing, the jump that we made in just about a year. And then that's how we used to, that's the old salaries compared to the new one. And this is the old UT presence into now what we call UT impact. And while a lot of work was put into the details of the visual aspects, even more work was put into our confidence in the data and the actual usability of the dashboard. So I'm going to turn it over to Jimmy, and he's going to tell you guys a little bit about how we built confidence in our data and our navigation.
Thank you, Jake. I appreciate it. Hi, everybody. I'm Jimmy. So like Jake said, I'm going to be talking through testing and validation. And that's a huge part of any business intelligence solution, both to make sure that everything works as it's intended and that the data that you're presenting is accurate. So I'm just going to give you an overview of our processes and documentation that we created to kind of help with that. So what you're seeing on the screen here is a document we created for user testing. What is user testing? So we kind of defined that as anything that the end user would use to navigate or interact with the dashboard. In terms of scope, the IE team conducted testing for each major browser on both Mac and PCs, as well as Apple and Android devices. So to kind of keep things organized, we created this checklist with what we considered the most important dashboard suite elements. So the first one we have was navigation. So every element that moves you from point A to B really needed a systematic and complete testing on each page. So to give you an idea of what that actually means, we had categories, subcategories, buttons, icons, and it was usually between 20 to 30 of those on a page. So just for enrollment, that's around 1,200 buttons that we had to test the interactions between. So it's quite large scope. The second element was confirm that all the slicers function, and that the unneeded ones, say like if you're on a page dealing with gender, it doesn't make any sense to have that be a selectable option because it's going to kind of negate the impact of the visuals on the page. So those had to be kind of masked out, making sure all those work. And then the kind of the hidden ones, the ones behind the scenes, making sure that those work as needed to. The third element was making sure that the reset button that we created correctly kind of changed all of those slicers back to their default states, except for the masked ones. Third element was make sure that the tooltips were in the correct place and showed on the correct visuals, and the data that it was being hovered over is what was being displayed. Last element was check whether the displayed field names are correct. So making sure that each dimension was consistent with our data dictionary that we created, both for the correct term and for spelling and spacing and things like that for each visual. This is a step further. So this gives you an example of just one of those items that I was talking about for our enrollment dashboard. Each one of those rows was a specific page that did need to be tested. So just here on enrollment, that's 40 different things. And you remember all the different columns that were there for the different platforms and devices that had to be tested on each one of those. So quite a lot of testing just on one single element. And then this is the final step here, where you can kind of see where it's been filled in. So each person helping with the user testing completed their checklist for the specific device and platform. And then if there was an issue found, they made a note as to what it was. So the developer on that particular dashboard would know what to go in and fix. So you can see all the green highlighted cells. Those were actually elements that some sort of issue was found that we went back and corrected it. All right, now on to probably one of, if not the most important elements of testing. So data validation. That refers to making sure all the information shown on the dashboards was accurate. The method of checking the validity of the data kind of varied between our different dashboards. Enrollment, for example, we had pre-existing Board of Trustees materials that we used to kind of validate some of the high-level aggregations. And then we had standard enrollment reports that we used for some of the more granular pieces. Research was primarily verified against the National Science Foundation HERD files. So one of our developers, Nick Kuminski, used his exceptional Excel skills to kind of create a tool that compared that against Power BI. The last one, UT Impact, there were really no pre-existing reports to validate against for that type of granularity for that data. So the validation was more checking for outliers and then leveraging knowledge of subject matter experts to kind of make sure all the numbers seem reasonable. This is kind of a practical example of what I'm talking about. So you can see all the different kind of elements on the page that are numbered. 1, 2, and 3 were just kind of little card numbers. So you could kind of just go look at your materials and validate against that without having to pull it into a spreadsheet or anything. But the rest of the visuals there on the page actually had to be exported to Excel so that we could then kind of fill things in and make notes if there was anything that was off or anything like that. This is an instructional sheet that each of the team members doing the validation received. It kind of told you how to use the validation spreadsheets, where to find your validation materials, any other notes that might be helpful to that whole process. This is a filled out example. And if you see the image that's going to pop up here in a second, this is what that's validating. So it's very, very limited. There's a single visual, a single chart on that table. But if you go back to look at it, you know, each one of those data points need to be validated. Plus you start adding in the different campuses and take it down to that kind of granularity. It's a lot just for a single visual on a page, just to give you some idea of like the scope involved of doing that kind of validation. So once the IE team was satisfied with our internal testing and validation, we sent the dashboards to the campuses, and then based on their feedback, we fixed any issues that were found and then moved the dashboards to production, which in this case meant publishing them to data.tennessee.edu. So now I believe Rachel's going to walk you through an overview of our website.
Before we transition, I have one question in the chat for the BI team. Lee Cheek asked when will the UT Southern data be added to enrollment? Do we have a sense of the time on that?
Good question. So we've been working with the IT and IR offices at UT Southern on getting their data integrated with ours. I don't have an exact date or an exact timeline. We're progressively getting closer. I'm hopeful for this fall being able to integrate at least some of UT Southern's data in, but no firm timeline on it.
Thanks, Rachel.
So I will pull up data.tennessee.edu here. So this is what you see when you first get to the site. Title, there's a navigation bar along the top for the different areas where we have dashboards available or coming soon. A little bit of a blurb telling you what you're going to find on the site, and then a featured dashboard. This will be updated as we publish new dashboards. Right now we see UT Impact there, which we'll see a little later on. As you scroll down, you'll see these quick links, which are to our most popular dashboards. The salary dashboard is very popular, and then enrollment, of course. And then down at the very bottom, you've got tiles that sort of mirror those navigational categories up at the top here. So two different ways to navigate to the same pages there. So I'm going to navigate us over to the enrollment dashboard to show you what it looks like to navigate through one of these dashboards. So you saw pretty much this from Jake earlier on what our dashboards are currently looking like. We've got this navigation pane over toward the left, the campus slicer up on the top, followed by this information icon, data dictionary icon, and help icon. That is pretty standard across all of our dashboards. That's a similar navigation style. So just wanted to highlight, especially because of some of the questions that came in earlier, there is these information and data dictionary tabs that note when data are updated and where the data are coming from. I know that there were questions about data quality, which Jimmy addressed, and then also, you know, where are these data coming from and when are they updated? So we try to highlight that on each one of these informational pages. There's also a data dictionary that'll take you back to the website level to see this page where you have each one of the dashboards listed, and then as you expand it, you can search up here for whatever term you're looking for a definition for. Getting back over into enrollment. So those are always available to you on each one of the pages. When you first get here, what you're going to see in the main part of the page is a curated view of what we thought was most important, or maybe questions were asked most often for the general topic we're looking at. So for enrollment, of course, undergraduate and graduate, total enrollment numbers, so on. There's not a lot of filters on these landing pages, just the campus slicer along the top. And then you get a similar secondary landing page as you go to each one of these categories in enrollment. Excuse me. So for example, here's the degree level one, just a simple chart with the degree level information. Then as you drill in to the next level is when you really get to some of the more nitty gritty information. You've got these set of filters down at the bottom that are on each one of these pages in enrollment. Once you get into these content pages, where you can look at, you know, specific races and ethnicities, genders, whether someone's a Pell recipient, right, to really nail down whatever question you're looking at. So that is really where, if you're looking for specific granular information, you would go to see that. There's also tabular views for each one of these. So when you first click on the content page, it'll take you to the charts. But if you're looking, you know, you just want the numbers and you want the specific ones, there is this tabular view that is also available. So that's sort of how the general website works and how each one of the dashboards are laid out. So at this point, I kind of wanted to switch over to talk about maybe some use cases, examples of the data, the specific data that are on these dashboards. So I'm going to take us over to the research expenditures dashboard to talk about that. And then Jimmy and Jake will also share a couple of the other dashboards. So I used to work in the UTK Office of Research, so I know how the research offices work a lot of the time. And there's a lot of questions around expenditures. So the NSF HERD, which is the Higher Education Research and Development Survey, happens every year where universities report how much they're spending on research and development. And that is what this dashboard shows. If you didn't know that already coming, of course, you can always go over to the About page. But that's what we're looking at here. So a lot of questions coming into the research offices about federal expenditures and non-federal expenditures. So if you're wondering, you know, how have our expenditures changed over time? How have those changed between federal and non-federal expenditures? Really, you can see that information right on this landing page, seeing the increase. You can look at specific campuses if you're working at one of the campuses and really just want to know for your own institution. And maybe, you know, you see these federal expenditures and you're curious about where those are coming from. You can also drill into, you know, the source and government detail pages. So if you wanted to understand where, you know, most of our peer data, our peer funding is coming from and whether those expenditures are getting their funds, this is where you would find the specific government agency that we're looking at there. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Jimmy, I believe, yes, to talk about some more of the data that is on that enrollment dashboard.
I have a couple of questions in the chat if y'all don't mind. So one general question is the information downloadable from the tabular view? Like, can it be exported from there?
Yeah, so right now with published to web and Power BI, it's just not something that we can make happen. So it's not built into Power BI right now. I'm hoping that Power BI will change that so that we don't have to come up with sort of a crazy workaround. It seems like it's something that you should be able to do and we would like for you to be able to do. So we don't have a solution right now. I'm hoping Power BI comes up with one, but hopefully coming soon, but not right now, no.
Related to Power BI, another IT question, are we leveraging Power BI Premium to provide the data or public access leveraging Power BI Pro licenses to build these dashboards?
So we all have Pro licenses. I think that DTS might have been working on different licensing structure for Power BI. I'm not sure if they changed it or not. We on the BI team do all currently have Pro licenses. And so that's how we're building them. And then we're just publishing to web so that we can make these publicly available.
Great. One last one before we transition to Jimmy's use cases. Is there a way to filter down to the concentration area, for example, for education majors? So for instance, integrated studies major has about 9 different concentrations that we report on for accreditation and national reports annually. So they'd like to be able to dig down to that level of detail. Is that possible?
So I see Jimmy navigating over to it. There's a discipline and major option. So if these are, the words differ between campuses. So when we say concentration, I'm not entirely, I don't know for sure that these are concentrations for you all, or if there are concentrations within these. But this is as granular of information that we have is in this filter that Jimmy's showing right now.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Ashley. All right, so I'm going to go over some use cases for the enrollment dashboard briefly. Just kind of general questions that you might have and how you would kind of go about getting those answers. So my first question is, how has African-American enrollment changed over time at each campus? I did want to show this. You can actually open these to full screen too. If you're on a smaller screen, makes it a little bit easier to see. So to answer that question about African-American enrollment, you would navigate to the category of demographics and then race. And if you're wanting to kind of see that question answered visually, this bottom chart is probably your best bet. And the way that Power BI works is you can kind of contextually click on things. So say, for example, if you clicked on this option here, that would limit all the visuals on the page to just that specific information. So that would kind of get you your answer as far as like a look over the past 5 years, what that would look like. Kind of a deeper dive into that specific question would be, how does that vary by gender? So to get to that, you would use one of the slicers at the bottom of the page and choose whichever gender option you wanted. And that's also going to change all the visuals on the page for that. Another question, how many FTEs do we have? That's a really broad question. You can really get that most anywhere in the dashboard from any of the tabular views, because that is an element that we chose to include on all of the tabular views as a measure. So there's going to be this column that kind of gives you those totals, and then you can dig deeper into any other specific topics by using the slicers at the bottom to get there for that. How would FTEs vary by residency? It's kind of a deeper dive. So we could actually go to the residency category there and pick either one of these tabular options. And again, you've got the chart with the total FTE numbers listed there on the side. Third question, how did international enrollment change during COVID? Very good question. There's 2 places you can really go in the enrollment dashboard for that. The first one would be demographics, and again, race. And that's actually a bucket that we have included in race or ethnicity. So you could use the contextual clicking to get that answer to kind of see over time what it looked like. And it will actually filter this other bucket, which is what it falls in here at the bottom. So you can see that kind of ribbon chart there as well. Another way to answer that would be through the residency category. You could go to jurisdiction here, and you have a column that has international there included if you wanted more of a tabular view of that kind of data. Final question, what are the top fields at each campus? And we actually have a field of study category here that you use to answer that. So you click on it, and then you have this kind of chart here showing you kind of within each campus what the numbers are. If you wanted a deeper dive to kind of see what fell within those different fields of study, you could actually go to this discipline. And that's exactly what that does. It breaks it out by the specific disciplines under majors, and you could use the slicer down here to choose that. But those are just some examples of things you could use and how you would get those answers. So I will turn it over to Jake to do a UT Impact use case.
Thanks, Jamie. I'm back, everyone. Let me share my screen. So UT Impact is a pretty specific, unique kind of set of data. It's all location based. And this was primarily created for our government relations team. So not a whole lot of like, I think it's a very interesting tool for the general public to use as well. For example, I'm curious about how many people associated with the system live in my county. So I'm going to navigate to Tennessee counties. And for example, I live in Knox County. So to get a quick overview, I can hover over Knox County, and right then it'll tell you the amount of students, employees, alumni, and then the campus institute unit breakout and the total expenditures for my county as well. If I want to blow those up because that text is small, you can just click on the county and it'll filter everything down to the county level. And then I just want to note real quick that you can see that only total expenditures remain up here. That is because these two figures, jobs created and economic impact, those were given to us by the Boyd Center. And they were pretty confident that that number shouldn't be broken out into county level. It's pretty hard to disaggregate down to that small of a level. So those are just statewide figures. And yeah, we don't, it's kind of a messy business to break it out into anything smaller than statewide level. Another question you might ask is, what county has the highest number of alumni living in it? So obviously, you could go around and like hover over random counties and see the alumni number in them, or you can change the slicer down here to number of alumni, and that will affect the heat map of Tennessee right here. Obviously, that's not going to change much. As you can guess, Knoxville has the most alumni. It's kind of the counties where our campuses are. The heat map is going to kind of reflect that. Same with number of employees. But if you wanted a kind of a more straightforward way to look at it, the tabular view is actually a really good tool for looking at like top 5, top 10 counties by any of these variables up here. So like I said, top counties for alumni in the system. If you just click on what you're trying to sort by, it'll sort the whole table just in a descending manner. So Knox, Hamilton, Shelby, etc. And then you could say the same thing for our employees. And then you can even do it by campus. So for Martin, where do our alumni live? Seems like they all move to Shelby or live in Shelby County. And then I think the tabular view, though we can't export, I think it's still a really cool tool to have in these dashboards. And you can answer those questions as well with any other of these categories over here. So these are United States congressional districts, if you're interested in those at all. Same with Tennessee Senate districts, Tennessee House districts. It's not just counties. And I think it's, if you dig into it, it's really interesting data. And it really kind of shows off the impact that the system has on the state. So fun stuff. With that, I'm going to pass it back to Rachel, and we're going to kind of continue our discussion.
I just got one question in the chat that's an interesting use case. Julia Alexander wanted to know if there's a way to see alumni by degree awarded. So like engineering, education, etc.
So we are actively working on our degrees awarded dashboard. Hopefully that'll be available soon. And that would be where you would find that information. So it'll be by year, how many degrees were awarded for each of the majors, and then sort of where those folks are, similar filters to what we've seen here today. So in progress.
Perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. So that's the end of sort of our presentation. So I mentioned before, we're going to move into breakout rooms. I believe that that'll give us the opportunity to have a little bit more discussion, since I know there's a lot of us here. So each room will have a facilitator there to help guide you through a conversation about what you saw and also sort of what you're working on in regards to data dashboards. So with that, I think we've got about 20 minutes in those, meant to say that. So that's about as much time as you can expect there. Then we'll come back and sort of talk about what we talked about and wrap up. So, all right. Can you send us into our breakouts, please?